Tonight, we won't unroll papyrus to count gods or trace the bloodlines of kings. Instead, we'll stand at the edge of a city that has forgotten how to breathe. The air tastes of clay and iron. The Nile holds its pulse beneath a film of red light. Somewhere behind sealed doors, a prayer trembles in a bowl, and even the walls seem to lean closer to listen. This is Memphis on the night when Wrath learned to sleep. The streets have covered their mirrors. Lamps burn low, afraid to draw attention from the haunt that walks in human shape. They call her Sekhmet, the breath of Re, the fever that remembers its maker. She moves through courtyards like a flame with patience, and no one dares to name the color of her eyes aloud. So lower the lights. Let the hush settle the way dust does on an altar. And if your breathing begins to slow with the faint pulse of the coals, that's the house remembering it is alive. If quiet myths like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share the time and place you're listening from, perhaps the next prayer will find you there. And somewhere behind those shuttered doors, the night takes a slow breath. The silence shifts, almost curious, as if the air itself wants to remember who it once served. A bowl rings faintly, a clay sound that carries farther than a prayer, and the first ember of the story wakes. In the streets, even the wind walks carefully. It moves between sealed thresholds, brushing the dust from door bars, learning to whisper the name that no one dares to speak aloud. And when it finally reaches the temple walls, the red light stirs. Patient, ancient, and already listening. The hunt that wouldn't stop is not loud in the way stories like to pretend. It is a measured walking, like noon dragging a finger along a wall. Sekhmet's breath is said to taste of desert heat running downhill. She keeps pace with her own legend, which is a very practiced pace. When she looks toward a door, the house remembers every promise it ever made. People tell each other the small details that feel calming, like how her earrings are the good kind that close with a click, and how her mane falls in neat, flame-colored braids, and how her eyes know the very ancient trick of seeing a person and a plan at the same time. A priest whispers that all gods have more than one mask, and that somewhere under the hot one lives a cool one, the way milk hides inside a seed. This is comforting in the abstract, though not necessarily when you can hear the lion walk. Fathers count heartbeats and pretend they are counting grain. Scribes test their red ink for luck by drawing tiny protective loops and pretending they mean glasses of water. If a household cat chooses a different wall to sit on, people accept the new law. The command that went too far has already been spoken. Ra is a father who sometimes forgets he has the voice that moves weather. He said, in a fit of principled tidiness, that wickedness should be removed, and the word went out like a drumbeat with no sense of proportion. It is awkward to be a command and discover you are not an indoor voice. Priests bring out the old rules, the ones you reach for when fire throws responsibilities around. There is a line in a dusty book that says, "If heat will not hear reason, change the picture it is looking at." This is a good rule for both gods and toddlers. The council is called not to fight the goddess, the minutes record that no one suggested such optimism, but to change the scene she sees. They decide without clanging that the world should look red in a harmless way, so that rage will think it has done its job and take a nap like a successful artisan. The plan is a gentle lie told for a good reason, like telling a sleepless child that the moon has signed a bedtime treaty. Brewing the blood that isn't begins as all clever kindness begins, with a lot of patient stirring. Barley beer turns all night in big belly jars that look like comfortable people. Red ochre is ground in a stone bowl until it stops being dust and becomes a color with opinions. Lotus and poppy whisper their small coolness into the mix, not as a spell but as housekeeping. A scribe stands to one side counting because numbers are the quietest magic. He marks ratios on a potsherd, this much red to this many jars, this much foam to this many dawns, this many priests to lift, this many bowls to distribute where footsteps end and reed beds begin. The brew must smell a little like iron and finish like bread. It must be read without boasting. There is a rule that the surface should catch the lamp flame and flatten it, the way sleep flattens voices. Another scribe checks the calendar and chooses a night when the Tikan star that loves remedies is on duty. He hums a hymn whose refrain is not stop, but cool, not kneel, but rest. Somewhere, a cat blinks at the color and decides it is acceptable. Laying the silent trap is not a trap in the exciting sense. It is the kind of trap that a nap lays for afternoon. Before dawn, a small army of good hands carries shallow clay basins to low places. The marsh skirts, the floodplain's lip, the alleys that slope like polite invitations. No lids are opened. The lids have already learned their lines. The basins are poured where morning will see them first, and where a thirsty thought will arrive before the angry one. The city shutters its windows, not because it is afraid, but because spectacle is for festivals, and this is an errand. Wooden sandals are lifted instead of dragged. At every threshold, a little drop is left, a red receipt for the night. A small boy carries a jar and a reed mat to wipe what drips wrong. He is pleased to be useful to a color. He takes his job very seriously because the plan is mercy disguised as imitation, and imitations only work if they forget to wink. When the goddess drinks, nothing announces it. Sekhmet steps into a field of her favorite weather and finds it lying everywhere like rivers on vacation. She sees herself in the basins, and the color answers her name. She leans and draws up a mouthful, which is not a story about gluttony, but one about thirst acknowledging a mirror. The ground exhales between swallows. The first taste lowers a noise only she can hear. The second tells her that he can sit down without losing face. The third teaches a reasonable truth, that enemies are not always outside. Sometimes they are drums that mistake themselves for orders. She walks and drinks and walks and drinks, and the world becomes a corridor of pink, the kind that you see when your eyes are closed against your own thought. Birds on the temple roof decide this is a good time to discuss seeds in whispers. A scarab crosses a step and feels important. Red reflections travel with her like well-trained attendants. Mirrors, once covered, are uncovered, so faces can remember themselves. Liars test the air and find it holds. There's a careful chant that says, more or less, stay near, stay low, stay gentle, and it is delivered in the voice one uses to guide a sleepy friend to a chair. At first the priests were prepared to say, stop, but the taste of the word in the mouth felt wrong, so they chose cool, which slides better across a red tongue. The command kneels, but does not kneel too deeply, because dignity is part of the dream. A census taker, who is never off duty in his heart, makes a note that people have returned to the business of being countable. He is soothed by this. The goddess' shoulders release their square. In a reflection, she sees not the hunter, but the friend of music, not the lion's stiff whisker, but the curve of Hathor's smile, as of a festival mask, floated up from a pond and attached itself with its own decision. Calling the arrows back is a domestic ceremony, no trumpets. A quiet god with a ledger closes a page in the sky. The 7 arrows, who were already bored, find their way to a quiver that looks suspiciously like a basket for bread. Household thresholds accept the little red dots as receipts, thank you for your patience, and someone goes around with a reed and draws protective loops over them, as if sealing envelopes. A collar of cooling stones is brought out and shown to the sun. The smell of milk is permitted back into conversation. In the doorways, people have small reunions with their reflections and compare notes with their shadows. It is agreed that the story should be told softly, that the cure should be remembered as a kindness, not a spectacle. A kingdom wakes up embarrassed that it fell asleep so hard and decides not to mention it. Ink, ritual, and medicine begin their very gentle debate about what happened. Ochre's hue signals thirst. Ethanol and poppy persuade the edges of anger to sit. Sedatives make the drum of blood choose a slower song. Priests write in the margin that colored waters were placed at the border of plagues because color, like rumor, travels faster than caution. Doctors who carry knives that prefer not to be busy record a few small facts: that heat softens in the presence of sweetness, that sleep arrives sooner when the mouth is occupied with tasting, that eyes relax when they are allowed to look at themselves with approval. The scribes add a column for poetry because some lines hold craft, but some hold weather. Where the columns overlap, the rescue stands. The verdict is not a verdict, it is a braid. Science in the dark looks like regular people measuring. A water clock keeps the night steady, so doses keep their appointments. Someone notes that the bruised phone carries a little smile as it breaks, and while this observation is not strictly medical, the scribe insists on its value. They inventory jars, count footsteps to the marsh, and time the distance between a swallow and a sigh. The ledger has room for everything because ancient paperwork is hospitable. On a separate shard, a junior scribe lists possible side effects: red lips, sudden friendliness toward songs, naps. He adds a small drawing of a lion wearing a flower crown, then pretends he did not. A bedtime oath closes the night carefully, like folding a linen square along the weave so it doesn't argue next time. If the tale is true, Mercy learned the taste of bread and slept by the river. Bread becomes an oath in Egypt. When you say, "I have bread with you," you put a roof over a conversation. So the priests set loaves at thresholds, not as offerings to a hunger, but as paperwork for peace. They count breath in, 6 out, because 6 is a shape you can draw without lifting your hand. Jars cool on stone and keep their silence. Morning compares notes with fact and chooses small, reversible steps. Someone writes that if the color cooled the world, perhaps the world owed the color a day off. The door closes softly on this thought, and the city keeps it like a warm coin in the pocket. All of this makes a very sleepy kind of sense. The goddess is both lion and laughter. The beer is both red and harmless. The people are both afraid and very good at chores. Festivals will later remember this night as the time when a stern household learned a lullaby. The calendars, which love tidy miracles, place a little jug symbol beside the month line and pretend it has always been there. In some homes, on the anniversary, families pour a thimble of sweet beer onto the threshold and wipe it away immediately, like a joke that knows when to leave. Children giggle and ask for the part where the arrows go into the bread basket again, and elders oblige because repetition is how Egypt rocks itself to sleep. If you are still partly awake, you can think of a few odd comforts. A goddess can be guided by a reflection, which means so can a person lying under a thin blanket. A city can be quiet enough to change a mind. A color can be hired to do Mercy's errands, and a bull can learn to wear a disguise. You can let those ideas walk around your room the way soft sand walks around your toes in shallow water. If you prefer, you can imagine the jars being carried back to the storeroom and stacked by size, handles aligned like attentive ears. You can imagine a priest writing the word rest and then deciding to write it again because the second time looks sleepier. You can picture the lioness finishing the last cool mouthful and seeing herself not as an arrow, but as a dancer's yawn. She sets the night down the way someone sets a heavy necklace into a tray lined with felt. She turns toward a simple tune played on a simple instrument. The city uncovers its mirrors and practices being ordinary with relief. And then the red washes into a pale, practical pink that has the temperament to be morning. People open doors with the grateful slowness of cloth unrolling. The pestle goes back to its shelf. The ledger dries. The cat chooses yesterday's wall again to prove that luck has been reset to defaults. Somewhere a scribe dots a final red word and blows on it until it darkens to brick. The Nile looks at all of this with its usual polite expression and carries on with its very long sentence. You can let your eyes do the same. The story does not end. It just learns how to lean. If sleep wants you now, it already knows the way past the jars and the basins through the alleys where soft footprints live over the place where the arrows made friends with bread, into a field of red that has forgotten to be sharp, and then farther into the quiet that keeps the world spared without saying so. You might not expect a household to have a night watch led by a dwarf with a lion, Smain and a hippo with opinions on cradles. But in Egypt, the bed had its own tiny guards, and they took their work very seriously. The first guard, who answers to Baz and to you again, is the kind who arrives unannounced and leaves footprints the size of a thumb. The second, Tauret, likes to lean on a ladle as if it were a scepter and check that anyone about to be born has a fair chance at liking mornings. Evening comes along the mud brick like a cat brushing each doorway with its whiskers, and the house accepts the soft order of the night, water jar filled and covered, lamp trimmed until the flame has the temperament of a peach. Sandals turn toes out so they will agree with dawn. Over the bed, a painted board shows Baz sticking his tongue out in a way that is both protective and unmistakably comedic. A child who has memorized clouds by shape counts the stars visible from the courtyard and reports the total to a sleepy lizard. The grandmother ties a small amulet of Tauret around a cradle string and reminds everyone that hippos, when properly consulted, are very good with boundaries. If you are still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe, or just let that plan yawn and turn over. Even Base approves of low-effort decisions after sundown. The house is not large, which is helpful, because small spaces concentrate safety like honey thickening in a coal bowl. There is the narrow entry with its polite bend, so street dust loses interest, the long room where mats wait like folded sentences, and the rooftop that doubles as a calendar when you lie on it. On a shelf live the gods that prefer this house as way of doing things. This with his shaggy crown and drum turret, with her patient eyes a serene cow for Hathor, who supervises lullabies, and a clay cat who has the kind of smile that says it knows the recipe for silence. The family has a system for night. Shoes are negotiated, shadows acknowledged, the big jar praised for keeping its water cold as a secret. A scribe cousin has lettered a tiny blessing above the door in red ink, the friendly kind of red that looks like a palm pressed there for luck. He is also drawn, for the sheer pleasure of correctness, 4 microscopic eyes on the bed legs, so the bed can keep watch in 4 directions without getting up. Somewhere a cricket begins its shift. Somewhere else, a loaf decides that cooling is the same thing as learning a lesson about patience. Base enjoys houses that tidy themselves. He comes in sideways because he is phenomenon first and guest second, and plants his little lion feet on the threshold like punctuation. He carries a short sword mostly for signaling that problems should be smaller, and a tambourine for moments when the air needs to be reminded which beat to keep. His hair is the kind that refuses to sign a truce with combs. He is very, very good with babies and with people who have temporarily misplaced their sense of humor. Tauret follows without hurry. A river disguised as a mother, hippo belly forward, crocodile tail coiled modestly away. She carries ink and essay as if they were kitchen spoons, and smells faintly of warm straw and the inside of figs. The two of them do not bother with ceremony. They look at the lamp, the faces, the corners where worries tend to pile up, and they nod in the mild way of professionals who approve. A soft breeze, which has been waiting all evening to be typecast as blessed, finds its cue. It is a good night for amulets. On the bedpost hangs a little ivory carving of Bess with his tongue out, 2 millimeters of comic defiance. The tongue has been polished by a decade of thumbs, and tells jokes to the wood about how seriously it takes its job. There is a blue faience hippopotamus the size of a bean that lives in a pouch near the cradle. Its glaze pretends to be water so convincingly that mosquitoes lose interest. A string of small shells stitched into the baby's cap will, according to an aunt who keeps all traditions as if they were preserved fruit, make sleep remember its appointments. At the window, a wedget eye painted in lapis pigment winks exactly the right amount. 1 part vigilant, 1 part bored, and Base tests the lines around it with a finger to see that the paint hasn't been tempted to go traveling. The grandmother, undefeated in the art of minor incantations, whispers 8 names that all mean please and 1. That means thank you in advance. The scribe cousin logs the time when the lamp lowered its flame from lively to companionable, and notes, for the record, that the cat blinked in agreement. No one asks why there is a small bess drawn on the underside of the breadboard. Everyone knows bread listens to authority. It helps that Egypt is full of harmless paperwork for luck. Knots are tied in threes for base and in fours for Tawrate, though no one explains to the knots why. Lotus petals drift in the wash bowl and practice being moons. A coil of red thread circles the door handle, so any complaint trying to enter must walk in a small circle until it gets dizzy and gives up. If a nightmare were to arrive, which is rude but not unheard of, it would be shown the household inventory baskets accounted for, broom bristles trimmed, child's giggle present and correct, and would feel outnumbered by evidence. The mother places a tiny base stamp on the baby's foot with ochre mixed thin, not so large that the baby could trip over it, but large enough that any passing mischief recognizes a badge when it sees one. It is science and charm sharing a cup. The measure is simple, just enough. Base, satisfied by lists, begins his rounds. He inspects the oven and declares it off duty. He checks the basket that is sometimes a cradle and sometimes a boat in games, and he tightens the reed mat as if it were a drum. He tastes the air for leftover stories and provides a small diplomatic yawn to set the pace. Then he moves to the dreams themselves, which he approaches in the manner of a librarian reshelving. He selects the gentler ones, wading through barley to count frogs, coloring hieroglyphs inside the lines, the sort of dream where you realize you have forgotten to be 5 years younger and no one minds, and he places them on top. When he encounters a dream with too many teeth, he removes the teeth and leaves the rest, turning a chase into a picnic. Tawret, meanwhile, oils the hinges of the night. She walks the boundary between breath and worry with a hand on each, keeping them civil. She smooths the wrinkle that sometimes forms on the world right above a new mother's heart and says, in a voice that could butter bread, that it is perfectly allowable to sleep while still loving everything. The lamp, hearing this, lowers its shoulders visibly. There is an hour, technically many minutes, but Egypt likes dignified words when the ceiling and the stars negotiate whose turn it is to be ceiling. During this hour, Bess tells the house a very long joke about crocodiles learning to dance and forgetting to bite, spoken so slowly that the punchline decides to become tomorrow. The joke includes a brief tutorial on the correct width of a protective eye painted on a mummy, S-wrappings about the span of the first knuckle on a carpenter's thumb, because Bays cannot resist privately useful data. He mentions Ra's night boat gliding past with a crew who keep a timetable written in yawns, and how the pilot knows he is on schedule when the constellation of the bull looks like it is chewing, but not swallowing. He offers, in passing, that the best place to store a worry is under a jar lid that already has the satisfaction of closing well. The family listens without listening, bodies learning the parts of the story that only bones hear. Bass plays his drum, but very softly, the rhythm most useful for convincing a floor not to creak. He moves around the bed and taps each corner, indexing the room into safety. His tongue peeks out, not at anyone in particular, but at the category of nonsense, which tends to lose confidence under such scrutiny. If a mosquito arrives, it finds a wall already occupied by a drawing of a larger mosquito with an arrogant expression and decides it cannot compete. Tawret enforces a curfew on thoughts that begin with F. She carries them to the water jar, lets them look at themselves on the dark surface, and explains that reflection is a clotting agent. The thoughts nod, having been given something to do. The baby snuffles. The cat briefly attempts to replace its tail with a more comfortable tail and gives up. The reed mat remembers it was once a field and lies accordingly. The household gods enjoy paperwork after midnight. Baze reviews the under mattress receipts, 4 dried petals, a tiny shell, the scrap of a hymn that smells like oil, and finds them in order. Tauret checks that the broom is stored, bristles up so luck cannot run out of the house like water from a careless bucket. Someone has placed the best head amulet on the jar of grain, sized just so. It looks like a small doorman who could dissuade mice merely by being overqualified. On the wall hang 3 clay masks made for a festival long past, one with a grin too, wide to be sinister, one with a frown pretending to be useful, and one that is simply asleep, and Baze adjusts them so the asleep one is in the center. He is firm on the point that decor should do some guarding while it rests. The gods themselves rest between tasks, not by closing their eyes, which would be unscripted, but by watching something definitive, like the steady drip from a water clock. The drip makes a hollow syllable that, if translated, would read as enough. When the night pauses, Bess measures it with a fingertip across the crack of the door and announces that it is exactly 2 softnesses wide. He explains to whoever is listening from inside their sleep that softness is a true unit in houses where people tell the truth kindly. He demonstrates by tucking a corner of blanket and letting it spring back once, like a respectful bow returned. Tauret counts breaths, not for quantity, but for texture. The way a baker checks dough, by pressing it with 2 fingers and trusting the bounce. She hums a tune learned from crocodiles who winter in reeds, a tune that makes time blink slowly. She reminds the moon that babies prefer its quieter face. The moon, which prides itself on customer service, complies. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, a clay jar cools and grows in confidence, because jars in Egypt are certain of their role in civilization and sleep equally well whether they are empty or full. There is, inevitably, a small complaint, a dream about being late to a chariot that keeps deciding to be a goat that arrives and asks for managerial attention. Baze takes it aside and proposes outsourcing. What if the chariot were simply a basket and the destination were merely a nap? He draws the dream a map with a single line shaped like a yawn and stamps it with his tongue. The dream is grateful to have paperwork and goes to implement it in a corner. Tauret attends to a different worry, the thin one that hums behind a new mother's teeth when she imagines everything at once. Tauret brings her a cup of cool water and a very small schedule that reads, "Sleep now, love in the morning. Repeat." The mother's bones, which are wiser than her thoughts, sign the schedule with a deep sigh. Somewhere, a very shy gecko decides it is in charge of the ceiling and stands a little taller. Dawn considers arriving and then sits down again because the house is finally getting good at this. The household gods like a tidy ending that is not an ending. Baze walks the perimeter, which is only 6 steps in any direction, and leaves a grin on the latch, so the door will remember it all day. He pats the breadboard as if to confer a degree, and the board accepts with dignity. Tauret checks the cradle's knots, tests the water level with a finger that makes small circles of approval, and places her palm an inch above the baby to bless the air the baby will soon require. She is careful not to wake anyone with her opinion that mornings and mothers belong to each other. Baze writes 1 word on the doorpost in invisible ink composed mostly of attitude. The word could be translated as enoughness, which is a doctrine that keeps for years. Morning, with its apricot edges, finally puts a foot down. The family wakes by degrees, the cat first, because cats like to pretend they invented daylight. Then the father, who remembers a dream in which he was responsible for a fleet of very tiny boats that all made their schedules. Then the grandmother, who hears the birds practicing and decides to pass the exam by listening. Then the mother, who wakes to find that her breath is a friendly animal again. And finally, the baby who sneezes and thereby assembles the room. The inventory looks good. The amulets have done their work without taking credit. The painted eyes have kept their line. The knot count matches the knot plan. The jar is still cool enough to be proud. The bed legs feel honored to have been furniture and eyes at once. On the rooftop, the dew has written a few small notes that only plants can read, that they share the gist. Today is long, but it is made of little squares of yes. Base and Taret do not require thanks so much as they enjoy accurate retellings. The scribe cousin writes a line in his notebook. Night completed without incident. Cat did excellent work. Household returned to default harmony. Drum barely used. He adds a tiny drawing of Bess guarding a loaf and smiles at his own sense of proportion. The grandmother sets a damp finger to the Bess amulet on the bedpost to refresh its shine and reports to the room that the god looks pleased. The father asks if anyone else dreamed of a tiny harbor full of baskets, and the child announces that yes, but her boats were bread crusts, which is logistically superior. Torit straightens a reed mat by the corner and departs by stepping through a reflection on the water jar. Base exits by noticing something entertaining on the other side of the threshold and following it out with heroic stealth. They will be back tonight because the night is a job with regular hours and decent benefits. If you are still half awake with us, you can think of small things that make this arrangement work. A tongue that frightens unhelpful thoughts. A hippo who likes babies. A painted eye with a balanced sense of boredom. A lamp that knows the difference between company and interrogation. A jar that keeps a secret cool. A cat that reminds the world how to be comfortable. You can imagine tying a knot that means enough and placing it where your breath can see it. You can file your day under Bess's system, worry in the jar with the good lid, laughter on the bedposts where you can reach it in the dark, kindness on the floorboards so footsteps learn it by heart. The Nile will carry the rest because the Nile understands paperwork better than most rivers and has a department dedicated to letting things drift politely out of reach. The story, like the household, does not end. It just keeps its shift changing guard with the sun, giving the small gods of comfort something to do and leaving on the door a grin you can feel when your eyes are closed. You might not expect a library to have a bedtime or to breathe a little when the doors are shut. Yet in Egypt, the House of Life closes its eyes with the city and keeps reading in its sleep. The walls know the first letters of 1,000 names. The floor remembers sandals. The moon makes a small white window on the table where a blank sheet waits like a quiet lake. The night clerk arrives with the key and a basket of reeds, the color of sparrows' backs. He unlocks the door the way you unlace a long day, and the room settles. Voth is already here, of course part ibis, part patient teacher, the inventor of lists and of the pleasant silence that follows a list. He stands in a painted feathered crown and looks at the shelves as if they were old friends who still keep their promises. On the table are 2 palettes, one shallow well for red, one for black. The red is for beginnings, protections, and names that prefer attention. The black is for everything else, which is almost everything. A small water jar leans toward the reed pens the way a helpful person leans to pass you a cup. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe, or write your name in the air with your finger and let it fade. In this place, even the intention counts as a tidy entry. The moon is a co-worker here. It moves slowly along the plaster ceiling and turns each grain of papyrus into a narrow path, a quiet road for words. The clerk warms his hands on the lamp, but keeps the flame low so it will not tell stories about itself. He slices the reed pens with a bone knife, slant upon slant, until the tips look like orderly swallows. Each pen gets a moment of trial on a shard of limestone. The test words are always the same: peace, bread, long life, and a private joke the scribes share with. Thoth, a very small hieroglyph of an ibis looking stern at a loaf, which means loosely, please do not litter in the margins. The jars of pigment buttons are labeled in a hand that never rushes. red ochre powdered fine as whisper, soot gathered from festival lamps, washed and settled, gum from acacia trees, patient as old honey. On a wooden shelf, a thin tablet keeps account of the read length used this month, because Thoth likes to balance books in all senses. The river is only 3 streets away, breathing with large lungs. Small breezes from it carry the smell of damp clay and of boats sleeping with their ropes tucked in. Somewhere a cat demonstrates the proper way to own a doorway by standing in it and doing nothing at all. Scribes speak here the way bakers speak in a dark kitchen before dawn, with murmurs that carry certainty but not distance. The night clerk begins the hour by mixing a little black with a little water, turning the brush inside the well until the gum melts and the color wakes. The sound is sticky and kind. He writes the date, year X of a king who sleeps well, and draws a framed doorway at the top left corner for luck. The doorway is false, of course, because true doorways invite visitors at bad hours. A false one lets ideas come and go while the room keeps its nap. He writes the name of a woman who brought a basket of figs to the temple. Then a child's dream dictated earlier about a crocodile that politely asked permission to be a log for a morning. Then a list of jars and where the lids are. He writes slowly, letters like measured breath, reed making its fountain-shaped little squeaks. Red is used for the first line only, because red has opinions, and then it rests. Thoth should be exaggerated in myth, but here he is a reliable supervisor. He tips his long beak and corrects the angle of the lamp by a finger's width. He does not scold. He is the kind of god who keeps spare pens and never says, "I told you so." The house of life is also the house of small formalities that keep the world from tripping. Scrolls return to their cords with an audible satisfaction. A leather strap with a key keeps the cabinet of medical charms closed. The label says in red, "For opening only when opening is deserved." In the corner, a cupboard stands ready with clean bandages, a jar of beer vinegar for cooling fevers, and a recipe on papyrus for soothing tea fennel, mint, a pinch of ground barley, patience stirred clockwise. On another shelf live the night copies, which are the copies made when the air is cool and forgiving. Scribes swear these copies sleep better inside their baskets and do not curl at the edges as much as copies made at noon. It might be myth, it is also true. The moon looks at the baskets, nods, and continues its shift along the lintels. The clerk pauses in the 4th line to smile at a note from a predecessor. Do not write when you are entirely awake. It interrupts the river. He takes the advice and loosens his shoulders until he is, at best, river adjacent. You can travel a long way here without taking a step. The maps in the library know the routes of gods as if they were fairies. Ra's sunboat moves along its nightly channels written in blue-black, past caverns with names like Place of Turnback Faces and Room Where Good Advice Stays Put. Thoth's itinerary is easier to follow. He walks between bedside and ledger, between thought and script. He keeps a notebook, thin wooden slats tied with cord, where he files every correction that improved a sentence without hurting it. There are many entries. Replace thunder with distant drum. Replace fear with the need to adjust the lamp. Move the word for always one finger to the right. He believes with long experience that words shift their weight at night like sleeping cats and must be petted the right way. The clerk tries the new phrase. Instead of punishment, making the balance patient, it reads like linen stretched smooth. Between the cupboards, 2 benches form a narrow aisle. Here the night smuggles little facts into the world. The best inkstone is the one that remembers rain. The proper angle for a reed pen is like the beak of an ibis when it thinks about eternity without bragging. A papyrus sheet hums faintly when it is ready. The hum is the cousin of the sound jars make when they agree to hold water. The clerk writes a line from a hymn to the moon and makes the sign small enough to be a kindness to the reed. He adds a dot the size of a poppy seed and sees the sentence exhale. He does not know, and does not need to know, that the dot will be the part a future reader loves, the way one sees a smudge on a child's cheek and likes the child more. Under the table, a basket holds offcuts of papyrus for practice and notes. It is the luckiest basket in the city. Many good lines begin against its side, while the writer thinks of nothing special except keeping his shoulders quiet. The most rigid rule in the house of life is the hush that comes when a name is written. Thoth taught the first scribes that names are small doors, and doors must open into good rooms. When the clerk writes the goddess's name, he adds a protective sign as naturally as tying a sandal strap. He pauses before the name of a deceased neighbor and lays the pen down to let the room be courteous for a moment. The walls lean in but do not interrupt. The moon lowers its voice. Even the lamp approves by becoming rounder. Then the reed moves again. Small excesses are avoided because Thoth dislikes pomp and likes accuracy. You may draw 2 decorative lines under a heading if the heading is patient. You may not draw 3 unless you are prepared to dust them daily. Errors are not flogged. A mistake is a visitor who gets lost and needs you to escort it politely to the door. The clerk scrapes the thin wet letter with the back of the pen, smooths it with a fingernail, writes the right one, and adds a tiny sign meaning whisper of corrections. It is the friendliest footnote in the world. A few scrolls have titles that make the night smile. Unpersuading scorpions to admire your sandals from a distance. A brief account of winds that prefer the west side of courtyards. Pleasant words to say to beer so it minds its manners. Egypt allows the practical and the charming to share the same shelf. There is a serious treatise on measuring fields after the flood. Next to it sits a list of good places to nap in the shade of statues, with notes on which statues consider naps a compliment. Someone has copied the calendar of lucky days onto a long strip of papyrus that runs the room like a train track. Each square says something helpful in a very calm voice. Good for writing letters, bad for gambles, suitable for haircuts. Best for forgiving cousins. Thoth pretends not to read it, but he always writes a check mark in his mind on the days that suggest errands for kindness. In the 3rd hour, the city sleeps its steadiest, and the library loosens the lace of time. The clerk stacks finished sheets with a strip of clean linen between them, so the ink dry with a sense of dignity. He slides each stack into a wooden tray where someone has carved a small ibis, standing on one leg, as if to say, balance is not a posture, but a verb. He writes the tiny shelf mark on the corner sector, basket, roll number, a taxonomy so soothing that thinking about it is almost as good as a nap. He writes a spell for dreams with clear exits, in which doors are always openable, and rivers are non-swollen, and he files it where the nurses will find it before the festival. He copies a recipe for a poultice that persuades stubborn muscles to become more like river mud. He makes a clean copy of a letter from a bride's mother to a groom in which the mother expresses hopes for the couple's bread to rise their jars to seal, and their disagreements to be soluble in small cups of water flavored with mint. The letter includes a postscript that reads, "Please return this papyrus. I like the texture." The clerk leaves the line in. Thoth approves because the truth is useful even when modest. Scribes keep a humor that is neither cruel nor loud. Between lines, the clerk notes that the ibis of the temple did, that morning, look like an accountant reviewing a goose's expense report. He writes a marginal ibis with one eye slightly larger than the other and tucks the joke into the gutter where only the book will laugh. He writes a proverb, "Do not argue with the measuring rope when it lies straight." He writes another, "If a jar creaks, praise its lid. It will creak less." He writes a note to himself to replace tomorrow a pen that insists on being dramatic, because dramatic pens spill during minor sentences. Thoth tilts his beak to hide a smile. The god places a small white feather on the table, not to weigh hearts, but to remind words of gentleness. He balances it on the brass corner of the pallet. It stays there, not moving, until the end of the night, because even feathers do office work gracefully in this room, the moon reaches the high lintel. The river turns in its sleep and shifts the city's air by the width of a thought. The clerk prepares the book over his nightly sailing and adds a tiny check to the 5th hour, when the crew trenchers out stale shadows and feeds them to lions made of good intentions. He notes that the stars kept their lines and that the crocodile constellation blinked only once, which is within the usual range. He adds a sentence that every copy of the book includes: at the crossing. Thoth speaks politeness to the measuring ropes. Nobody knows what the sentence means, but it reminds readers that even at the edges of the world, someone remembers manners. The clerk sands the line with a pinch of perfumed powder and flicks the extra grains into a bowl. Egypt wastes almost nothing, not even the idea of fragrance. Thoth crosses to the cabinet of tablets and draws out a small slate where children practice. He writes a loop and a line and a square and a bird, and suddenly the slate has air in it, like a sail. Sometimes the house of life receives visitors who never open the door. Tonight a couple passes in the street, arguing softly about the correct way to angle a water jar when pouring for an elder so you do not splash. Their voices float through the bricks like far-off flutes. The clerk smiles and writes a short instruction tilt jar watch lip, face breathing, and files it under manners. A donkey shakes its head outside, and the bells on its harness tinkle like an opinion a friend will forgive in the morning. Much later, a watchman pauses at the threshold, listens, and reassures himself that the library is dreaming properly. He moves on. The moon folds its arms and leans thoughtfully on the edge of a cloud. The cloud slow walks over the roof and leaves a stripe of shadow that the floor considers and then accepts. Before dawn, the clerk stands to stretch. He touches the palette to thank it for keeping pools tidy. He rinses the pen points in clean water so they will not wake sticky. He returns the gum jar to its place and covers the red so it will not develop ideas while unattended. The finished sheets are tied with linen and a simple bow. The bow is small, so the knot will not cast an unnecessary shadow inside the basket. Thoth opens the cabinet of scrolls and lets one sigh out and then in again, as if it is practicing being alone. He tucks the feather back into his crown. He removes from a peg a string with tiny ivory counters and clicks off the hours used. You would think a god would not need a timekeeper, but Thoth believes the calendar itself deserves respect. He closes the cupboard door with 2 fingers and waits for the polite click that means the latch has decided to be useful. The last task belongs to Redding. The clerk writes a compact blessing at the top of a fresh sheet for whoever opens the library next. Come in quietly. The night has done good work. He dots the final sign with care. The dot is the size of patience. He places the sheet at the front of the stack. He blows out the lamp with a breath that carries the vanilla of vellum and the smoke of sesame wicks. The room does not darken so much as it acknowledges the moon's expertise. Thoth stands by the door as the key turns. He becomes for a moment a painted ibis on the wall, then becomes a memory of a painted ibis, then becomes the kind of emptiness in which letters line up without fuss. Outside, the city is weaving its braid of mourning donkeys with baskets of green stuff, bakers lifting lids, a boy carrying a pot of milk as if it were an egg with ambitions, a woman washing a step with exactly the same care she will later give to a sentence. The clerk walks home and keeps his eyes on the bright edge of the eastern street. He will sleep until the sun is grown enough to knock politely on the day. The house of life will keep breathing, little in, little out, stacks settling by fractions, the moon sliding off the table and onto the floor where it becomes just another rectangle of pale comfort. If you're still awake, you can imagine your own shelves in order, little wells for red and black, names arranged like jars with good lids, a feather on a corner to remind your sentences what kindness weighs. You can think of Thoth with his measured beak, writing a note to you in that thin, unhurried hand. Sleep now. The copying will proceed, and even after you sleep, The library of the night keeps going down its rows, touching spines, adjusting chords, letting every word find its shelf and lean there, exact and unafraid, until someone, later, opens the door and reads them into morning. You might not expect a city to lower its heartbeat, but at night Memphis practiced exactly that, as if every courtyard agreed to breathe a little slower until the lamps learned the rhythm. The streets smelled of crushed date stones and damp limestone. A clay pestle hushed in a corner where someone had been grinding color for a festival sign and then forgot, mid-swirl, because sleep tapped them on the shoulder. It was one of those hushes that contains more than silence, the kind that collects little sounds, the way a jar collects perfume crickets rehearsing. Water folding against keys, linen brushing the lintel as a late visitor slides inside. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you could follow and subscribe to this drowsy city. Or you could do what the good doors do and simply lean on your hinges, agreeing kindly to whatever the night decides. A whisper travels the alleys, no wind, just talk that prefers to dress like wind for modesty and says a lion is walking the names of the neighborhoods. The whisper isn't frightened. It is a librarian with a finger to its lips. Sekhmet in her radiant anger has walked longer than any bell ought to ring. People sprinkle cool water at thresholds, not as magic, but as manners, because even a goddess recognizes courtesy when she sees it drying on stone. Mothers tuck silver mirrors under cloth, so reflections will not volunteer for errands. Fathers count their children and then count them again, the way you do with figs before you close the basket. The old say the goddess carries many names as you would carry many keys, and sometimes a key bends in the lock. The door opens too far, and the night goes out into the street unsupervised. Somewhere in a hall where the ceiling is farther away than usual, a council decides that if you cannot pick up a flame, you can at least change the color of the room around it. The plan arrives the way a recipe does, humble, precise, requiring more patience than story. Barley beer is the river's friendly cousin, and there is plenty of it cooling in the shade. The jars stand with wicker rings like collars on dignified dogs. A scribe brings a stone bowl heavy as a polite promise, and in it the red earth of the desert is ground to silk. The color is not royal purple drama or emergency crimson. It is the red of sunrise caught in water, the soft iron that sleeps in clay. Other jars arrive as if they too had been invited. Poppy for quieting lotus to remind the tongue of ponds, gum from acacia trees to persuade things to stay. Together a square of linen ready to strain the day out of anything that got in by accident. The old women hum about ratios in a way that would confuse algebra, but reassure anyone standing nearby. No spell is sung, the work is respectfully boring. They stir and someone stirs the stirrer, which is to say the conversation, with notes about festival days and what should be cooked on them and what should be firmly not. A child volunteers the fact that crocodiles blink more on hot days. A priest nods gravely as if this were critical to the recipe, and in a roundabout way, it is because attention is the spice that keeps a plan from falling asleep at the wrong moment. The brew does not aim to taste like blood. It aims to taste like bread that remembered to be brave. They check it by nose smell of earth wearing clean clothes and by ear, because liquid speaks differently when it settles into its destiny. It makes a sound like new sandals agreeing to be useful. Before the light changes, a quiet procession carries the jars to the low places where tide puddles the floodplain. No trumpets. The jars dislike trumpets. They prefer the small bell inside the wrist that rings when you turn a lid. The color gleams in the uneven hollows, not shiny like lacquer, but soft like pomegranate skin you haven't polished because you trust it. The city pulls its shutters most of the way closed, which is not secrecy. It is the polite way to avoid staring while gods work. Dogs sit with their ears at a considerate angle. A boatman ties his rope twice, then a third time for luck, then pretends the third knot is about safety to avoid laughter from the rope. The trap, if you insist on that word, is simply sympathy written large on the ground. Meet thirst with something it can mistake for itself. The air becomes modest. The color waits. If hunger can be fooled by the smell of a bakery at dawn, fury can sometimes be met halfway by a mirror that answers in its dialect. When the goddess comes, she is not an explosion. She is a weather front. The reed beds bow out of habit. The frogs edit their chorus down to a duet. Sekhmet sees the marsh flooding with red and hears her own name in it, because colors, too, can speak in full sentences. She steps to the water and finds a person looking back who knows exactly what to do. The first sip is not dramatic. It is a lion drinking where the river lays its throat down to be stroked. The second is pleasure reluctantly confessed. Warmth meets warmth, and the drum in her chest remembers dances that never needed weapons. Priests keep away, as one keeps away from a sleeping child. One has finally persuaded not to wander close enough to check the breathing, far enough not to wake any ambitions. Their chant, if it can be said to chant, is a list of household chores. Let the millstone rest, let the brick dry, let the bread do nothing except rise. Somewhere in those syllables, the fierce mask slides, and Hathor's gentler laugh peers through like a neighbor checking on the stew. If a goddess can have the good kind of dizziness, it is this one, where the world stops insisting on sharp corners and becomes round enough to roll you back into the center. News moves even when no one carries it. Mirrors are uncovered in houses like lids lifted from clay ovens. Faces return to themselves reluctantly, like kittens rescued from cupboards. Thresholds are made tidy with a smear of red, the size of one fingertip receipts filed with the night that you have kept your end of a bargain she never signed. At sunrise, the offerings are milk and music, because milk suggests the kind of patience that does not argue, and music counts time in a soft voice that everybody trusts. Men tune lyres to the rate of a calmer pulse. Women sing about cows and about children who will definitely nap after this verse. If arrows had been loosed in anyone's mind, they rattle back into their quivers as if embarrassed and asked to be counted quietly. If you must measure a rescue, do it with warm bread laid out early and with tally sticks that mark full jars, not empty ones. A scribe stands in the shade making lists that are, to be honest, boring in the best way. Number of courtyards washed. Number of shop doors open with 2 hands as a sign of respect. Number of arguments postponed to a more intelligent hour. The tallies become a poem accidentally, as good tallies sometimes do. Meanwhile, the goddess rests like heat in a stone that has decided to cool by degrees agreeable to the hand. Around the edges of the city, ink gets to work as if nothing supernatural had occurred, because ink likes to think that ordinary saves us most days, and perhaps it is right. In the house of life, a palette looks like the patient little pond it always is. A clerk mixes black with water until it thinks about rivers, then writes how the ochre was ground and how the jars were placed and how nobody shouted even once. He adds a red heading that says, in the careful script used for beginnings, on cooling the color of flame. And then he stops pretending this is a secret and simply records what good people did at good hours. Another clerk one who keeps his sandals neatly because neat sandals are faster copies notes for healers on tinctures that lower heartbeats and words that lower them further. Poppy is folded into honey. Directions say a bean of it, like a grandmother measuring salt between finger and thumb. They add a page from a hymnal that reads as if it were a recipe, because in Egypt recipes and hymns borrow cups from each other and never forget to return them. A line appears in the margin in a different hand, probably the apothecary's. Cool water on wrists, shade on mind. Talk to fear as if it were a guest and not a landlord. Science in this age wears linen and keeps its voice modest. Someone compares the color of the sleeping pools to blood and writes very gently that they are not the same thing. Similar does not equal identical, and even a goddess can be persuaded by an analogy if the tone is even. Another person, maybe a woman with ink on her thumb, draws a little sketch of a jar with a lid that lists into place at the perfect angle. Under it she notes, safety prefers geometry. The door to the library is not locked. It is deliberated into closing. Scribes walk home with the warm satisfaction of tools cleaned and put away. The satisfaction that always tastes faintly of sesame smoke and the last mouthful of beer. Outside, people choose small vows the way they choose figs, by touch, by scent, by what promises to be sweet without making a spectacle. A man swears to count to 7 before offering sharp words. A woman promises to keep a jar of water near her door for travelers who haven't learned the city's pace yet. None of it makes a headline. All of it is the point. Morning puts the city back into itself with the softness of a blanket settled over toes. Potters lift lids and check whether clay objects developed opinions overnight. Bakers reach under flatbread with blunt fingers and turn it, not because it requests turning, but because turning prevents drama. People tell the story of the goddess seeing herself and laughing, then napping, and by midday the story has acquired small decorations like sprigs tucked into hair. Someone says the goddess counted swallows crossing the river and lost track. Someone else says the goddess did not lose track. She simply decided numerals live in jars too small for the sky. Both versions are fine. The red pools sink into the earth and leave stains in shapes like quiet maps for a journey nobody needs to take now. Children are forbidden to splash in them and obey in the way children obey when forbidden items are untheatrical. Neighbors sweep. A priest thanks the river aloud for doing nothing special. A midwife writes down a tea that helped a nervous woman in the night and leaves the recipe pinned under a stone near the bakery where people will see it without having to ask. The scribe who keeps the roll of days suitable for certain matters adds a cautious mark beside the state. He will not call it lucky. He will call it teachable. Under the mark he writes, for cooling, for counting, for lids. He writes very small, as if whispering. Another scribe adjusts the official calendar, not moving festivals, but smoothing their edges, because exuberance has its place, and it is not every hallway. A boy entrusted with carrying water to the ibis in the temple does his errand with what can only be described as swagger, though in a very tiny font. A tailor decides to try a new stitch that holds cloth without tugging. This is absolutely related to the night everyone had, though a historian might lack the vocabulary to tie it down. The city exudes that barely visible shine things get when they've been cleaned with care. The bowls, the conversations, the plans that can wait their turn. Even the river looks brushed. By afternoon, merchants return mirrors to their hooks, and the reflection of bright linen makes the shops seem taller. A law speaker sits in shade and reminds a querulous pair that the goal of an argument is not victory, but a workable afternoon. He tells them to bring him the problem again tomorrow after sleeping on it, which is Egyptian for allow night to write its quiet notes inside your head. At the School of Scribes, students practice the verb to relax, along with to pour and to weigh, because all three are secretly the same lesson, the controlled transfer of pressure. Thoth, somewhere on his rounds, pauses to admire a copybook line where a child has drawn the feather of Ma'at so evenly it almost floats. He approves without a speech. The sun leans toward evening, the sensible end of enthusiastic plans. As sunset brushes door lintels, the city takes its oath in pieces. It is not proclaimed. It is placed like cups turned mouth down against dust. People agree without paperwork to keep cool jars at hand, even in months that don't demand them. They agree to speak in voices that give the other person room to stand in. They agree to cover mirrors when necessary and to uncover them when bravery has had a drink. A physician reviews tablets and sets aside one labeled for the drum in the blood, writing a small improvement in the corner because perfection is a slow-breathing creature. Temple doorkeepers check the hinges, the sacred and the ordinary swaying on the same pins and oil them until they choose quiet over squeak. The memory of the red night settles into the stones the way warmth does after sunset, almost invisible, very faithful. If you're still listening, you can imagine the jars being washed and turned upside down to dry while night lifts the city into its cool version of itself. Think of the goddess wrapped not in rage, but in the heavy pleasantness of a nap taken under a tamarisk. Paw on nose, tail making occasional grammar marks in the dust. Think of milk warming in a shallow bowl for a child who woke too early and now drowses again with a mustache. Think of scribes tallying what went right and discovering, with some surprise, that the list is happily long and almost dull doors opened, water poured, music timed to hearts, reflections returned at a reasonable hour. The moon comes to inventory the roofs, pointer finger of light checking one, then another. Somewhere a reed pen dries its hair and points toward tomorrow. No one resolves anything grand. They simply choose, again and again, to cool the color of their own flames. And as the city stretches the cloth of evening over itself, the river keeps counting swallows. The red pools fade to rust, and a gentle, almost bureaucratic peace files itself in triplicate one copy for the gods. One for the people, and one for the whisper that wanders alleys, making sure everyone remembers to sleep. You might not expect the guardian of bedrooms to be short, pot-bellied, and fond of making faces that would get him scolded at more formal temples. Yet in Egypt, the first yawn of the evening belonged to such a god. He is the one carved on bed legs and painted above cradles, the one who sticks out his tongue at nightmares and wears a lion's mane like a nightcap. When the lamps are lowered and the river pulls a quiet sheet over its own bright thoughts, thus pads along thresholds and windowsills as if the house were a patient he is inspecting. He carries no spear, only a repertoire of expressions that scare away what needs scaring and amuse what needs calming. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can decide to join his little patrol by subscribing to this drowsy household. Or you can do what wise pillows do, listen politely and then forget almost everything. The mothers of the street secure amulets to braids and crib cords, tiny best faces, little knives that cut only dreams, hippo beads shaped like the goddess Tolerant, who approves of happy births and equally happy naps. A scribe's daughter kisses the bronze dwarf stamped on her necklace as if it were a bell pull for assistance. A carpenter traces the same face on the lintel with a charcoal finger and tells his children the guardian likes to be greeted in his own style, which is to say, cheerfully, it is an odd comfort, this god who looks like a friend of the family that always brings an instrument slightly out of tune. He never minds, and the dreams appreciate the gesture. Evening is his favorite paperwork hour. On the bedposts, he checks the small images like a night clerk sorting mail. Cats and ducks and fish have their dedicated corners because the responsible amulet knows its beat. The household's calendar board hangs by the door, a square of wood where someone has chalked the month's festivals and the simple arithmetic of grain jars and sandals. Base adds nothing to it. He is not a planner, but he approves of lists the way a baker approves of preheated ovens. A soft breeze folds itself between curtain and wall. From the alley beyond comes the reliable piano of donkey hooves, a rhythm as steady as Ra's boat docking at the Western Quay. Lamps argue in whispering tongues and agree to burn slowly. In the kitchen, a small pot cools on the stove, as if it had all the time in the world to become tomorrow's breakfast. The old grandmother arranges 3 sprigs of mint in a cup because someone once said mint pleases good spirits. And even if it doesn't, it pleases the cup. Base looks at the cup gravely and nods. If a god could stamp a document adequate, he would. At the foot of the bed, a bundle of laundry waits. Somewhere under it, a cat purrs like a distant fairy. The god stoops, discovers the cat, and they exchange a look of professional recognition. Both are on patrol, both prefer quiet solutions, and both consider the careful draping of blankets to be part of security. In a city like Memphis. where the moon falls into the river every night and climbs out again without making a scene of it. The business of sleeping is surprisingly technical. Women line their eyes with malachite that refuses to run, even if a dream gets damp, and men rub a little oil into knees and thoughts, so neither will complain when the body turns once or twice in its sheets. Over doors hang small nets tied with knots that have names. The knots catch the snarls in the day before they drift into pillows. The most practical minds place a jug of water near the threshold because bad dreams hate to step around hospitality. A jar painted with lotus eyes watches the room with a polite lack of interest and thereby keeps it safe. If anyone forgets to straighten the sandals, Base does it because sandals facing in the same direction remind a house not to wander. He counts children with the accuracy of a merchant counting beads. He checks that grandfathers have a shawl, that mothers have a moment, and that the smallest lamp has understood the assignment. He is the opposite of glamorous, which is exactly what nighttime requires. Asterisk, asterisk, the god is not above a little stagecraft. He likes to introduce bedtime by whistling a note that sounds like a kettle deciding not to boil. When that fails, he hops. The hop is a ritual leap learned from dancers at town festivals, still energetic but now dedicated to the noble cause of corner checking. He taps the bed frame twice. This convinces it to remember all the times it has successfully held a sleeping person and to do so again. He taps the baby's cradle. It sighs its small wooden sigh, a sound like a reed pen approving a good line. In houses where someone is ill or worried, he rearranges the dice that children left on the floor so they show gentle numbers, 2s and 1s, the arithmetic of simple tasks and manageable mornings. If a coral has been muttering under a blanket all day, Base lifts one blanket corner and tucks the coral up with air holes in a firm order to sleep it off. He is good at this because he has no interest in winning. He is interested only in bedtime proceeding on schedule, which means unspectacularly. The goddess Mat, observing from her featherlit balance, approves the procedure. She has always championed the kind of order that looks like grace rather than like noise. The feather does not appear, of course, but people say the air grows fairer when Beast is satisfied, and perhaps that is the same thing with fewer syllables. In some houses there are musicians, and in those houses the god settles, his belly on a stool, and listens to lullabies that have traveled down centuries with polished ankles. Songs about cows and stars, about fishermen who work the exact distance needed to be brave and no more, about rasbark that chooses the east every morning as if choosing it for the first time. He never tires of the one where the refrain lists household objects: broom, bowl, window latch, and says to each, stay. In other homes, there is no music. Only the specific silence of people who worked hard and expect sleep as payment. Base likes that silence best of all. He measures it the way a scribe measures ink by how much remains ready for tomorrow. Outside, the neighbor's dog barks once, remembers an agreement, and stops. The bread jar clicks as it cools. The moon roams the roof like a guard with silver sandals. If you're awake and wondering what to do with your hands, you can fold them or gently, almost accidentally, press the like button. We have learned from Thoth that small marks in the right places make scrolls more cheerful. Then again, Bess would shrug and let you keep your hands where they are. He is not here for metrics. He is here for the long, ridiculous miracle of rest. Toward the middle of the night, dreams approach the house like polite visitors. They are not all brilliant. Many are the kind you would get at a market stall, slightly irregular, priced accordingly. Base prefers those. He knows the serial numbers of nightmares and stamps them return to sender with his usual grin. He has no sword, so his method is administrative. He assigns dreams to rooms like a fair captain assigning benches. The child who has been learning numbers receives a dream in which hippos line up to be counted. The teenager who can't stop imagining arguments, receives a dream in which the disputants forget the original topic and sit down to draw fish on tiles. To the mother, he gives a dream composed of small completions, ropes tied securely, baskets labeled, someone else washing the last cup. To the old man who napped too much in the afternoon, he gives a dream journey on Ra's night boat where the stars are the crew and the destination is. Conveniently, the next morning, none of these dreams are long. They are train connections, not tours. Each returns the sleeper gently to the station of their own bed. Base has a special routine for people who talk in their sleep. He stands in the doorway and negotiates with the sentences, urging them to turn into harmless shopping lists. Yes, he tells a wandering mouth, we will purchase more cumin. Yes, and perhaps better brush for the donkey. His goal is to transform murmur into inventory and inventory into a deep breath. Sometimes he impishly redirects a snore toward a rhythm the house finds familiar, perhaps the little beat of the millstone, perhaps the slow stroke of an oar. On feast days, he gives the snore a festive echo. On fast days, he swaddles it until it sounds like a drowsy kettle. The house, reassured that events are ordinary, settles like flour. This is not magic in the sword and lightning sense. It is magic in the way lists and habits and well-aimed jokes can be, which is to say, quietly effective. A curious thing happens to mirrors under Bess's watch. They turn shy. During the day, a mirror is full of opinions, but by night, when it sees a sleeping person, it lowers its eyes the way a doorkeeper lowers a voice. If a nightmare tries to borrow the mirror's shine to stage a performance, Base steps between them, filling the glass with what can only be called an exaggerated portrait of himself. It is not flattering, but nightmares are easily embarrassed and leave. On the windowsill, a small clay figure of a cat looks out. Another of a hedgehog minds the corner. Every house seems to own a menagerie of little assistants who do nothing noticeable and thereby accomplish a great deal. Base reports to them with a nod, and they cheer him on with expressions sculpted during a market conversation no one wrote down. He would be the first to say the work is shared. Even the floor helps by being level. Even the wind cooperates by selecting the right crack. Sometimes a traveler sleeps in a strange house and is brought into this quiet bureaucracy without knowing it. The visitor wakes once and sees the guardian not exactly standing, more like leaning in the doorway with the nonchalance of a friend who knows where you keep your cups. In the morning, the traveler is sure it was just the shadow of a chair or a trick of lamplight. Base is satisfied. He does not need credit. He needs people to arrive at breakfast with brows unwrinkled. He inspects the guest sandals, rearranges them so they point toward the happiest path to the door, and rests his elbows on the guest book of the night, which is a blank wall with the texture of eggshell. A line appears he did not write, slept. That is the entry he aims for .* around the hour when fishermen begin to cough and decide whether the river is worth the conversation today. Based is his second to last circuit. He prefers to leave just before dawn, when Ra's heralds are straightening flags and the ibis near the temple are composing their thoughts into those precise forms that later become hieroglyphs. He checks that every pillow has released the head it borrowed, that dreams have folded themselves and slid back into their drawers. He thanks the cat and the hedgehog and the jar with the watching eyes. He listens at each bed to confirm the small inventory of peace, even breath, relaxed hands, the faint perfume of crushed reeds on linen. If any house is short of that perfume, he sprinkles it invisibly, the scent of a clean page, the smell of a cold stone. He likes to leave a house slightly better than he found it, the way a polite guest rearranges fruit into a more encouraging pile. Morning makes reasonable suggestions. It recommends bread lightly baked. It recommends water on the face and a comb taken for a stroll. Bess nods. He is not on the morning committee, but he has opinions. He favors breakfasts that do not argue and chores that do not require heroics before noon. He watches as the house begins to move, the creak of rope beds, the whisper of reed mats, the ceremonial decision of which shawl to wear. In the corner, a scribe sharpens a reed and tests it on a crumble of broken pot. The first line he writes is not a hymn or a letter, but the list of things to buy, which is faith in tomorrow disguised as errands. A boy practices a yawn he intends to use in school when the lesson on measuring fields arrives. It is a safe yawn, repeating yesterday's measurements and finding them pleasingly similar. A woman looks at her amulet and smiles and ties it on, not because she thinks it alone holds the world together, but because it is nice to give the world a hint about your preferences. Before he goes, Baz makes a single face to the rising sun, not disrespectful, simply informative. It is the expression of a doorman reporting that the night left early and all keys are accounted for. Ra understands. They have long been colleagues. The sun lifts the city as one lifts a bowl, with both hands, careful not to spill the light into the narrow lanes all at once. The river wakes in sections like a giant cat and dries its paws on sand. Market sellers begin to set out figs as if placing commas in the day. If the household has a doorway that opens toward the east, Bess pauses there and gives it a path. Doors enjoy compliments in any century. He steps backward into the alley, turning sideways to let a broom pass, and vanishes behind the kind of corner that does not insist on being important. After he is gone, the signs of his visit are pleasantly dumb. A child finds a dice showing ones and twos and believes herself lucky. A grandmother hears the broom humming and thinks she must have taught it that tune long ago. On the bedpost, the little image of the dwarf seems, in some lights, to grin harder, in other lights, to nap. That is appropriate. A guardian of sleep should sleep too. The cat performs a long stretch and decides to continue Bess's patrol, because there is always something that might need gently not happening. The household calendar board earns a new chalk line. Oil lamps, reeds, soap, cumin. It looks like any list. It is also a proof of confidence. Even the jug of water by the door, slightly lighter now, feels included. By this time you might be considering a nap yourself, and the god would approve. He is not a god of strategies, but of good habits. He recommends corners that are not sharp, blankets that don't argue, and stories that don't insist on an ending. If your mind keeps walking around, he will walk with it carrying a very small drum. The drum has only one beat, and it sounds like sandals on a courtyard after rain. You follow it once around the yard, nod to the fig tree, pat the jar with lotus eyes, and return to find your bed has remembered you perfectly. The world, which is larger than any house but loves houses best, offers its nightly receipt. The moon inclines her head. The river approves the neighborly attempt, and Matt's feather rustles in that way that says balance has been restitched, not loudly but thoroughly. Base did not write any of this down. If asked, he would say, "We checked the latches. We set the sandals. We invited decent dreams." He might add, if he were feeling philosophical, that sometimes the bravest face is the funny one, and sometimes the strongest hand is the one that smooths a blanket, and so the night circles back, always patient, always full of paperwork for a little god who does not mind paperwork. He will return to the houses with their humble animal statues and their jars that prefer lids. He will patrol the slideshow of shutters and figs and chalk and mint and cats. He will let the snore fit itself to the millstone and nudge the dream toward the river where Ra's boat glides by on its clockwork route. A reminder that even the sun keeps bedtime. He will leave at dawn without footsteps and arrive at dusk without ceremony and find every time that people have. Once again, sincerely tried to make his job easy by making beds, by tying knots, by promising each other unexciting kindness. He approves, and his approval smells faintly of reed ink and clean mats. Nothing concludes. The household stretches. The river explains, in its watery handwriting, that it will be here all night. The small guardian grins, shows his 1,000-year grin to the dark, and walks another round, already forgetting where one dream ended and the next comfortable hallway begins. You might not expect a river to fall asleep by counting itself, yet on some nights along the Nile, the water drowses only after a small arithmetic ritual, as if numbers were a lullaby. The counters are not clocks or drums, but quiet stairs cut into a well where the river seeps in. A lamp hangs like a low star. A scribe waits with a reed that insists on good manners. He has the patient face of someone who knows the water will come when it is ready, and that hurry only makes ink feel important. The well is called a nilometer, which sounds grand in daytime conversations, but at night it is simply a stone throat the river uses to whisper. Marks along the shaft rise like a ladder for fish who prefer mathematics. Cubits, palms, fingers, each line is a tiny promise that the world can be measured without raising its voice. If you're still awake later, you can follow the habit of the river and subscribe to a single number for comfort 14 cubits, perhaps, or 12, and let it bob beside you as you drift. If sleep arrives sooner, the number will keep itself company. Numbers are good at that dot. A priest of Hapi, the generous one with papyrus stalks and a belt of water plants, lowers a rod into the well. The rod has learned to be impartial. It kisses the surface and comes back with the river's cool signature. No trumpet follows, only a thoughtful nod. The scribe writes a small curve, then another, nothing fancy, as if the page were a pleasant bank and the ink a short stroll. He does not write the word flood. He writes the word height because height is polite, and floods are more of a daytime topic. The lamp makes a circle on the page like a quiet moat around the news. A boy who is learning the trade counts footsteps between the marks. He looks down the shaft and thinks of the decans, the 36 star groups that take turns keeping night's schedule, and tries to assign one to each stair, so that every step will feel supervised. The boy enjoys supervision when it is gentle and mostly decorative. He believes the stars do 2 dot at the top of the well. Someone has placed a tiny offering on a ledge, a small loaf shaped like a crocodile, and a sprig of lettuce with the ambition of a tree. Offerings at night do not ask for attention. They are a way of talking to a god without waking the house. The priest nods at the little crocodile as if apologizing for making it symbolic instead of delicious. He straightens the sprig with 2 fingers and decides it looks official enough. The river accepts the joke as rivers do, by remembering it later when everyone is thirsty and laughing would be inconvenient. The scribe's reed skates on the potsherd where he keeps practice strokes. He likes to warm the pen the way bakers warm ovens, slowly and with stories. He tells the pen that when the water rises to a certain mark, the granaries will applaud without noise, and that when it rises too far, the fishermen will need taller sandals. The pen is easily entertained. Outside, night spreads like a sail that forgot to billow. A watchman leans against the stone and recites the round of dates. Wepet Rempet, the opening of the year with its sniff of sour beer and new reeds. The month of Thoth that refuses to hurry anywhere. The intercalary days that do not belong to any month, but help out generously, like cousins who bring extra bread to a feast. He says them in a voice that could read a shopping list and make it sound sacred. The deacons above shift their little lanterns to a different angle, which is how stars agree. Somewhere a crocodile rolls over and decides not to be a metaphor right now. The river keeps its face blank and tries not to smirk. The nilometer records this composure with the professionalism of a shopkeeper. In the last hour before a napping dot, the boy asks the scribe why the marks are so exact if the river is so moody. The scribe explains that exactness is a polite suggestion, not a command. You invite water to behave by making a clear path for it in ink. Sometimes it behaves out of curiosity. He shows the boy the difference between a palm and a finger on the scale, then pretends to measure the boy's patience in fingers, declaring it more than adequate for tonight and promising to review in the morning when patience feels taller. They both smile like people who know measuring patience is only possible after bedtime. The priest hears them and pretends not to, because priests are tall and must occasionally ignore adorable things for structural reasons. On some nights, the wind carries boat talk. Crews on Res Night Bark debate whether a cloud is late or early and whether lateness is meaningful to clouds. A helmsman swears he can steer by the smell of wet stone alone. Someone counts oars not to check people, but to soothe their own thoughts. Every so often a god clears a celestial throat and the stars straighten up, but mostly the talk is an exercise in not falling asleep accidentally. The river listens and chooses to remain awake with half an ear. The other half dreams in long green lines. The water's reading tonight will be called promising. Not too shy, not too ambitious. The priest will say so in the ledger with 4 harmless words and a pause. A pause is the Nilometer's favorite part. It is the place where nothing bad happens and nothing dramatic is required to prevent it. The scribe draws a small loop at the end of the line as if tying the message with string. He has seen letters travel downriver in jars. He knows string helps. If the jar breaks, the string at least suggests that the message meant well. The boy blows very softly on the ink. He is trying to learn the exact temperature of breath that tells a mark to behave. The lamp approves of this study and provides an exam in the form of a moth, which arrives and leaves without scandal, as if auditing the course. Nearby, a baker's courtyard has its own routine. Dough couches under cloth like lazy crocodiles, pretending to be pillows. A cat patrols the sacks of barley with the solemnity of a tax inspector who has decided not to inspect. The baker's daughter keeps time with her toe on the packed earth and hums to the timing holes on the water clock that her father borrows for festivals. Time is measured by what leaks, she thinks, and by what is asked to wait. She adds a breath to her hum to honor that theory. Her uncle, who once helped at the milometer and speaks of it as if it were a relative, says the cubit is a good unit for ordinary bodies because arms are portable rulers and people bring them everywhere. He demonstrates by balancing a loaf along his forearm and nodding as if the bread has passed an exam. The daughter sets the loaf down gently, like placing a patient on a soft bed. She has learned from the river that kindness is often a matter of angles. Back at the well, the priest tells the boy how the earliest counters used a palm leaf float to find the water's patient height. The boy imagines a leaf with a very serious expression. He imagines Hapi himself leaning on the well's lip and saying, in the accent water uses, that generosity must be measured if it is to be kept generous. Otherwise, it grows theatrical. The scribe coughs into his sleeve, agreeing with the god and also with the dust. He writes the hour in a margin with characters as small as a beetle crossing the page. He likes to make the hour unobtrusive so that time feels like a friend who is always there and never insists on being thanked. The fisherman stops to read the news in the scribe's face. The fisherman pretends he can read faces with accuracy, but in truth, he reads only ink-stained fingers and the angle of eyebrows. He nods at the priest, who returns the nod with interest, the way one returns a jar after using it slightly for thoughts. The fisherman speaks of mud with the authority of a potter. Good mud is the kind that doesn't argue when you push it toward another purpose. He says his nets prefer certain depths, the comfortable ones where fish are thinking modestly. The scribe writes a symbol that means ideal, then draws a tiny fish hovering under it. He is not supposed to doodle on official potsherds, but the fish refuses to be negotiated away. The priest squints, sees nothing, decides to continue not seeing it. The priest has a reliable gift for that dot as the night finds its middle. The city rearranges itself for comfort. Donkeys shift weight with theological seriousness. A gate misremembers its hinge and forgives itself. Somewhere in official dreams, an official dream in which numbers line up and bow like polite geese. In the dream, numbers request straw bedding and a lamp. The official gives them both because generosity in dreams is cheap and effective. Base, the small guardian of bedrooms, makes a face at a persistent snore and converts it to the rhythm of oars. The decans change watch, and the new ones arrive with tiny coffees no one sees. Ra's crew salutes with a whisper that sounds like the papyrus, Marsh turning over in its sleep. The boy asks whether the Nilometer can measure worry. The scribe, who has addressed similar questions to jars and once to a very patient goat, answers that worry is measured the way perfume is measured, by noticing when it has faded. The priest adds that the well can count only what agrees to be counted, and that worry never agrees on the first try. But he says there is a trick. You count other things around it. You count how many sandals are placed neatly, how many lamps remembered to be small, how many breaths kept their promise. You count the sprig on the ledge, and how much of it still claims to be a tree. Worry dislikes being surrounded by such tidy arithmetic. It lowers its voice and sometimes leaves. They lower the measuring rod again, and the water gives the same answer as before, but with the faint smile of someone who has repeated a name correctly. The scribe writes it once more, as if making the number comfortable in its new house. He has learned that copying can be tenderness. He sprinkles sand over the ink so drying will feel like a ceremony instead of an accident. The sand knows its part. It arrives and departs without speeches. Overhead, a bat stitches the sky together and pretends not to. If you listen, you can hear the thread, beyond the walls, on Elephantine and at other old sites where the river invented the art of being measured. Stone stairways go down into coolness, and dates carved long ago blink politely in lamplight. Some of the carving hands belong to people who never met each other, and yet collaborated across centuries like careful bakers, who shared dough through time. Each hand kept the same polite distance between marks. Each hand made the same promise to the unseen stranger on the next stair. When the flood was generous, the marks drank light. When the flood was spare, the marks waited with quiet backs. The river learned from this endurance, or perhaps taught it. It is hard to say who was the instructor when both were so patient, asterisk. Sometimes a scholar visits at night to copy the inscriptions onto a scrap. He writes in columns that look like reeds. He pauses often, not because the words are difficult, but because the silence is doing important work and he must not interrupt it. He imagines the ledger of the gods, where Thoth keeps track of things that are not sins and not victories, but simply good measurements. He imagines a page labeled Sleep Accomplished, with numbers that rise like stairs and never slip. He makes a small footnote to himself, recommend more stairs. When the wind turns from the west, it carries the smell of yeast and mud and a rumor of lotus. The priest, who has a poet hiding in his sandals, declares the night perfect for a gentle reading. He murmurs a hymn to Hapi so soft the river must lean toward the well to hear it. The hymn thanks the water for choosing not to be dramatic. It praises the color that is not blue and not green, but the memory of both on a glazed bowl. It asks that the flood climb far enough to feed the basins and low enough to leave the stairs visible for bragging. The river, like anyone complimented correctly, pretends indifference and then arranges its robe with care. A family on the other side of the street turns in their sleep. The father dreams he is counting taxes because he is a tax collector and imagination does not always escape its desk. But in the dream, when the number is too large, the clay tablet itself sighs and shrinks the figure a little, as if the tablet were also a farmer and sympathetic. The mother dreams she is sewing the month of Paofe to the month of Hathor with a thread that looks like a canal. She ties the knot in the shape of a bird. The child dreams of counting frogs by cubits, which is adorable and scientifically unsound. All these dreams will evaporate at dawn and leave a delicate salt of relief on the pillows. The salt will not be noticed. That is how relief prefers to be admired. Back under the lamp, the boy whispers that he can hear Ra's oars. The scribe says perhaps it is the millstone pretending to be an oar for practice. The priest says perhaps it is the breath of the well counting backwards toward the morning. All three theories are accepted without argument because nighttime is generous with theories that behave. They pack away the rod, not because it is finished, but because it has been seen and appreciated, which is often enough for tools. The scribe ties the ledger with string, the clever ribbon that keeps facts from wandering. He seals it with a dab of clay pressed by the face of a tiny scarab. The scarab once belonged to his grandmother and believes any sealing will eventually accomplish moral improvement. He lets it believe. The lamp is lowered to say goodbye to the page. The wall returns the echo of a thank you. Everyone is very polite to walls at Nilometers. Walls know more than they say and are never in a rush to say it. The boy drinks from a jug and returns it to its mark, aligning the handle with the little scratch that means home. He does this without thinking, which is how customs graduate into virtues. The priest straightens the crocodile loaf on the ledge, even though no one is looking. The scribe pats the ledge once, a superstitious gesture disguised as removing dust. The well watches all this and is satisfied, which is a feeling wells enjoy by looking exactly the same as before. When dawn begins to check its pockets for keys, the three of them step out into a city that has just remembered birds. The birds remove the cover from the sky with professional dignity. Vendors arrange figs into rows that look like sentences. A woman rinses her doorstep with a dipper and a shrug. The priest writes the word promising again, this time to the day. The scribe folds the ledger into his sleeve like a secret he expects to share with his breakfast. The boy counts the steps from the well to the street, then counts them again for no reason, except that counting twice is a luxury of mornings. They part with small bows, the kind you make to people who have waded a river with you. The priest goes toward the temple where he will fuss over flowers as if arranging a negotiation between colors. The scribe heads to an office where he will write, with equal devotion, the price of wheat and the length of a lawsuit and a note reminding himself to buy more lamp wicks. The boy runs home to report to a grandmother who will pretend the news surprises her each time. The water rose, the marks were polite, the gods were present, but discreet. She will give him bread dipped in beer and declare it a ceremony. He will agree, because breakfast is the most persuasive theology. Meanwhile, the Nilometer keeps thinking about numbers the way a pillow thinks about heads. It does not need the river to be dramatic. It prefers a night like this, stone cool and sincere, reed pens trotting gently, a priest with lettuce, a boy with stars, a scribe with string. It prefers to be the place where the world's appetite and the world's patience shake hands and do, not make each other promises they can't keep. It prefers to be boring, excellently boring, because boring is the gate to safety, and safety is the dock where boats of sleep unload. You may return here whenever you like. There will be a staircase, an honest rod, a figure in the ledger with a soft loop at the end, and a bowl-shaped echo that keeps the night from cracking. There will be numbers that look like the backs of dozing fish. There will be a river pretending it never needed to be counted at all, which is how you know it has agreed to rest. And if later tonight or any night, you find your thoughts measuring themselves without your permission steps to the kitchen, breaths until comfort, inches from worry to the window, you can think of the well. You can give your thoughts a rod and let them lower it into a small, patient silence. They will pull it up, see a number, and nod without making a report. They will become clerks of their own relief. You can imagine Hapi standing by with papyrus at his waist, grinning as if to say that generosity and arithmetic are cousins. You can hear the deacon stamping a docket somewhere in the upper air. You can let the figure you like best 10 or 12 or 14 float beside you like a tiny boat. It will not ask to dock. It will keep its balance quietly until you sleep, and then it will tie itself to the first stream that passes and travel with it to a field, where wheat rises in unambitious rows and the wind practices numbers it has always known. The river will note the event in a ledger no one sees. The entry will be a single word, slept and well. Pleased with its portion of the world, will sit through another night of gentle arithmetic, waiting for your footsteps to come back down the stairs, counting nothing loudly, counting everything well. You might not expect sleep to have doorkeepers, yet in Egypt the bedroom had a tiny festival committee, a dwarf lion who made faces, a hippo mother with a hand on her belly, and a collection of eyes painted on anything that would hold still. They were not dramatic guardians. Base and Tawret preferred preventive measures, yawns, lullabies, and the kind of comic threats that make bad dreams shrug and find another house. If you're still awake a little later, you can join their committee just by agreeing to look silly on purpose. That's the membership oath. If you drift off before the oath finishes, Base will count it as an enthusiastic yes. He's generous with the paperwork. The lamp is already turned down. It makes a small lake on the wall where shadows practice swimming. On the high shelf sits a wooden mask of Bez with a tongue that has tried several shades of red and settled on festive. The tongue's job is simple: embarrass evil on arrival. Evil, finding itself mocked by a foot-tall god with a feathered crown and a musician's belly, usually remembers another appointment. Tawret stands nearby, hippopotamus-headed and patient as a midwife, one hand resting on her round stomach, the other on the sign of life. She is comfortable being a statue. Statues nap professionally. A child has tucked a flower behind her ear, and it remains there by divine consent. The room smells of cedar, warmed linen, and honey stuck in the seams of a jar. Outside, Ra's night boat slips along its schedule with the punctuality of stars who dislike improv. Inside, a mother draws a tiny eye on the ribbon that ties her daughter's hair, because more eyes mean less worry. Eyes in Egypt do as much night duty as cats. The bed is a quiet machine. Wooden frame, cord lattice, mattress stuffed with reeds that persuaded themselves to be clouds. At the head, a short post carries another carved base, smaller, as if the god multiplied like a polite echo. Beneath the bed, an amulet of a coiled cobra hides the way a wink hides, obvious if you happen to be in on it. The girl turns on her side and watches the cone of perfume on her mother's head collapse at a dignified pace. It is scented with myrrh that remembers frankincense and politely doesn't say so. The father sits on a stool and mends a sandal thong with the seriousness of someone operating on a patient who complains with squeaks. When he pulls the knot tight, the knot agrees to be a good knot only. Tawret approves. Base pretends to play a frame drum, which is of course imaginary, but imaginary drums are perfect for bedrooms because only the drummer can hear them. Rumors of old stories nibble at the lintel like rumors. There was once a spell in which Isis learned a hidden name to save a life. There was a list of 42 small promises that keep a heart light. There was beer dyed red that convinced a goddess to take a nap and wake up nice. These stories enter the room the way cool air enters, not on purpose but as a correction. The girl asks whether gods really come when called. Her mother says gods prefer to arrive before they're called so they can pretend to have been there the whole time. This is excellent bedside theology. It reassures without moving any furniture. The father sets the mended sandal under the bed with the strap pointing toward the door, an old trick that tells wandering spirits which way is out. Spirits appreciate signage near the bed. A reed basket keeps the households calm, spare amulets, a small clay lion, a wad of ochre, a few cowrie shells that look like grinning mouths. Every shell is a smile in storage. The mother counts them like tiny moons and decides the skybox is full. She shakes the basket just enough to remind the objects they have work tonight. The rattling is friendly. Base sticks out his tongue farther in approval and then tidies it with the back of his hand because even a comedy god respects good grooming. Talret surveys the basket with the soft expression of someone who knows exactly how loud a newborn can be and how quickly magic must locate a bottle. First, the room tells a true, boring fact about the body. The wrists relax. The muscles along the jaw switch from comment to consent. The heart settles into its day job, but at night wages. Even the eyelashes remember their hinge. The mother rubs a little oil smelling of marjoram into the girl's hairline with her thumb moving in slow circles, twice clockwise and once the other way, as recommended by an ant who specializes in results that look like luck. The ant claims the circles match the direction of Rose's skiff around the horizon, once to wake, once for work, and once for the secret part after work when gods lounge and invent friendly stars. The girl considers this and decides she would like to work in star inventing someday, part-time with plenty of breaks. Talret approves of career planning that keeps room for naps. Asterisk. A whisper comes from the courtyard, the low murmur of water poured into a porous jar. Clay sweats the cool through its skin. Someone across the lane is telling a baby that sleep is a boat and the blanket is a sail. The metaphor lands easily. Boats are common currency in this city. The baby accepts the trade and settles. A gecko writes punctuation on the wall and leaves. Ra's crew changes shift. The deacons move their tiny lights half a finger, which is an official measure. Over by the door, a basket of onions keeps a record of the night by layers. Each layer is a page that refuses to be read because onions prefer privacy. Base understands and guards the basket as if it were a treasure chest of polite tears. The father hums a tune that was new 3 festivals ago and is extremely unfashionable, which makes it perfect. He touches the hoop of a new earring he carved from bone and asks Talret if she likes the curl. Talret likes all curls because they remind her of the Nile writing notes to itself. The girl asks, drowsy-eyed, whether crocodiles sleep. Her mother says yes, but they keep one ear in the water to listen for compliments. The girl laughs the way a pillow laughs by becoming softer. She slides a small wooden spoon under her bed, an old superstition that says spoons catch bad dreams by pretending to be a mouth with excellent table manners. Base is delighted with this idea. He claims credit for it on behalf of the tiny guild of nocturnal jokers. The guild meets whenever someone yawns. Now the room drifts into its second flow, where details decide to repeat themselves until they become furniture. The girl's breathing adopts the Nile's slow current. The perfume cone makes a small decision every minute. Drip left, drip right, practice symmetry, practice mercy. Talret leans forward just enough to look as if she is telling a quiet joke to the floor. The joke is that floors hold whole families without asking where they were earlier. The floor, being a good sport, doesn't laugh out loud. On the window ledge, a lump of natron salt sits in a dish to keep away damp and also regrets. It is excellent at the first task and does surprisingly well at the second. A scarab beetle, model not living, perches near the dish with the expression scarabs always wear, which says every morning is a personal project. The father checks the door bolt and returns to the stool without admitting that he checked it twice. In Egypt, even bolts like to be admired. They function better for it. The mother recites in a whisper the names of protective spirits, who might drift by if invited with grace. She prefers the household ones, the doorway god who notices sandals turn the right way, the stair spirit who makes sure sleepy feet hit the broad parts, the courtyard guardian who discourages argumentative geese. She includes a few polite phrases for Anubis in case he is on a neighborhood stroll. Although Anubis is a specialist in more distant journeys, Good jackals appreciate a wave from a porch. A reed brush hangs silent by the door for morning sweeping, and the mother thanks it in advance. She thanks the water skin. She thanks the mortar that grinds Cummin without criticizing how Cummin behaves. Gratitude is not an official spell, but every tool in the room perks up like a cat hearing its saucer. The girl is deeply inside the linen now, but her eyes blink at the small painted base again as if to check his credentials. He grins with the patience of a doorman who has seen every kind of guest and is not impressed by scary costumes. He has a lion's mane and little plumes above his tangled hair, and he stands on bowed legs like a dancer mid-prank. In some houses, Baze wears earrings, and in others he doesn't. Either way, his confidence is contagious and entirely non-threatening. The girl asks whether Bess ever sleeps. Her mother says he naps in shifts, like oars, and his tongue takes over when he's off duty. The tongue makes a face at nightmares, specifically the face that says, "You are not in the guest list, and also this is a family event." Nightmares, which secretly approve of bureaucracy, take the hint dot at the threshold. A strip of woven reeds forms a mat that keeps sand outside and stories inside. The father wipes his feet for the third time just because it feels like progress. He settles, finally ready to drift. He rests his head on his own folded arm. Pillows are excellent, but an arm is a pillow with memories. Taret, satisfied that everyone is arranged, leans in the way statues lean into the hush. If a stranger peered through the window, they would see a still room, but the stillness is active, like bees politely not working because the queen is napping. Sometimes a dream tugs the blanket. It asks if the child would like a small adventure. Not a chase, not a trial. This is a sleepy series, and the adventures are unionized. Perhaps a field appears, not too bright, with small birds who have forgotten to be shy. Perhaps the field has an irrigation channel, and you can move its small wooden gate a finger's width and watch the water change its mind very gradually, as if water were a thoughtful teacher with an eraser. If the dream becomes too eager and starts offering pyramids, the household gods cough meaningfully and the dream switches to baskets and sandals, which are the pyramids of bedtime. Tonight the dream carries the girl to the festival where people wear cone wigs and sing under pavilions, painted with water lily. She finds herself behind the musicians, where the rhythm lives on a mat and passes cups of tamarind drink to the drums. Bass dances there, too small to command attention, exactly the right size to make the rhythm stand taller. He steps in and out of the beat like a cook tasting a sauce he already knows by heart. A priestess of Hathor hands the girl a sistrum, and she gives it a single courteous shake, because shaking is important but must not wake the baby gods. The sistrum answers with a sigh of bronze reeds. The dream is pleased with its own arrangement and folds itself smaller so the girl can carry it home. In the third flow of the night, when even worries prefer to be horizontal, the house changes guards. The cat who always disdains everything performs a sudden act of affection against the father's heel and then pretends it was the wall. A breeze crawls into the room and rearranges edges, smoothing the corners of the net that hides around the bed. The net is the kind of curtain that mosquitoes find persuasive. Someone's donkey brays with the voice of someone else's grandfather, then falls embarrassedly quiet. The moon inspects the courtyard, nods several times, and leaves a chalk note for dawn. Ra's bark glides through the caverns of underworld geography, as if the map were printed on the inside of his eyelids. He greets gatekeepers with the confident laziness of a regular. He is exactly on schedule to step into the eastern reeds without startling herons. The crew hums a workplace song about light being a fruit you harvest gently. A star winks, which is a professional courtesy. The mother dreams she is tattooing tiny protective dots on the wrists of the months. Thoth sits on a folding stool and supervises the punctuation. He insists that semicolons are talismans and must be spaced a palm apart. The mother disagrees, but admires the ibis's beak, which keeps excellent time. Meanwhile, the father dreams of measuring a wall with a stretched cord while Pata approves his knots. The god commends the way the cord never humiliates the wall. All this is very restful. Even gods need hobbies that do not overturn boats dot around this hour. Midwives in other houses tie small knots on strings to keep pain from wandering into the wrong stomach. Around this hour, a clerk on the riverbank writes on a shard the quantity of barley that will move tomorrow if the wind remembers its job. Around this hour, a crocodile stares at the stars and forgets to feel like a crocodile. On the lintel above the sleeping family, the widget eye painted there does not blink, though it would like to. Eyes that never blink are kind to sleepers and hard on themselves. When they grow tired, bass whistles a tune only eyes can hear and the eyes feel seen, which is the most restful thing that can happen to an eye. The girl shifts, and the wooden spoon bumps the underbed with a friendly tick. A moth scribbles once in the lamplight circle, revises, and decides that bedtime prose is the correct genre. Tauret's shadow slowly changes sides, as deliberate as a fairy crossing a canal. In her dream, the girl becomes a baker sprinkling sesame on loaves that puff up modestly. Every time she sprinkles, a distant field gets rain the size of sesame seeds. She is careful not to spill, then intentionally spills a little, because the field looks happy when she does. The universe encouraged this small embezzlement. The judge of such matters yawns and waves it through. When the fourth and last flow of night slides in, it doesn't announce itself. It simply switches the house to a deeper key. The perfume cone is finally only a trace of gloss. The jar against the wall has cooled the water as much as clay will allow. The linen breath has a small minty chill to it where morning hides under the edge. Bess stretches. His yawn is impressive and absolutely silent. He checks every corner with a face that says, boring? Good. He straightens the family's dreams the way a teacher straightens the margins of a neat scroll. Tauret adjusts her grip on the ink and listens for any small cry anywhere on the street. Her hearing is tuned to the frequency where trouble whispers before it grows teeth. Hearing nothing but the slow folding of darkness into day, she relaxes. Statues are never completely off duty, but they take breaks like glaciers blinking dot in this last drowse. The world practices the day it's about to become, just to make sure no edges surprise anyone. The baker's oven gathers itself. The sycamore behind the house rehearses a single leaf's fall, then postpones it for drama it will never use. A scribe somewhere proposes to his reed pen that today they will write beautifully even about taxes. The reed pen agrees, as long as the ink gets a compliment first. On the river, Ra's crew counts the steps to the horizon and arrives exactly at 0 when the prow kisses the reeds. They are proud of this timing and pretend they aren't. The eastern sky pretends not to blush. The father wakes first. As fathers often do, with a small repair already in his hands, though, he hasn't found it yet. He checks the door and finds it perfectly, satisfyingly closed. The mother opens one eye and catches the moment when Bas appears to be considering a nap. She thinks him in a whisper you could store on a coin. The girl sleeps through the first rooster's consideration of existence, which is a polite gift from every god on the shelf. A draft lifts the mat, then sets it back. Nothing in the room wishes to make a decision that would require energy dot soon. There will be washing in a cool basin, and the spoon will come out from under the bed, and the tongue of Bess will rest from its shift while his eyebrows take over. Soon the courtyard will host bread dough, and the cat will investigate every bowl by law, and a neighbor will ask to borrow a pinch of natron for an experiment in cleanliness and courage. But not yet. The last minutes of the night have hired an extra guard, and he is excellent at his job. He looks like quiet and wears a helmet made from the idea of water, and his spear is a yawn. When he stands at the door, time lowers its shoulders and says, "Yes, we can wait another little while." If you are still listening, you can copy the household's method. Imagine Bess at the foot of your bed, making the sort of face that makes problems postpone themselves. Imagine Tarot with a palm on your breath, counting with you like a patient river. Imagine the painted eyes on the ribbon that ties all your loose ends for tonight. You can equip your own spoon and declare it an instrument of bedtime law. You can set an onion on the sill to keep dry weather in and weepy stories out. There is no exam. There is only a little guild of sleepy protectors whose dues are paid in yawns and who send receipts in the shape of small, ordinary mornings. The father lays a hand lightly on the daughter's blanket, a gesture so quiet it barely qualifies as movement, and in that second, every guardian present considers the task complete and the shift well served. Ra's prow shows its first spark over the roofs. The crew hums the opening note of day. Tawret's belly shadow slides back to its daytime angle. Baze winks in an entirely professional manner, which is to say the wink is mostly for him. The room prepares the plain miracle it excels at to become the place where people wake without having been chased there. The guild agrees to meet again tonight at the same soft hour, and if you fall asleep before the meeting adjourns, that will be counted not as absence, but as the most perfect form of attendance. You might not expect the sun to keep a planner, but in Egypt even daylight had a schedule, and the schedule traveled by boat with a crew who loved neat lists and tidy ropes. There were 2 boats, one for day and one for night, as sensible as owning 2 pairs of sandals. The day craft glittered. The night craft was comfortable and slightly stern, like a librarian with a warm shawl. People gave them names, Manjet for the morning, Maziktet for the dark, and the names behaved like bells. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can mentally subscribe to the crew's logbook. It's mostly entries like "stars punctual again," which is soothing to receive. If you drift off before the paperwork, that just means you've joined as an honorary nap captain. The crew will understand and sign your name for you in immaculate moonlight. At dusk, the river changes voice. Reeds whisper with more seriousness, and herons agree to stand still long enough to suggest sculptures. On a quiet quay somewhere upstream of your thoughts, the night boat unties itself in the manner of ropes that prefer accuracy to fuss. Rai steps aboard without ceremony. He's shed the glare and wears the version of himself that fits into a hush less like a sovereign, more like an attentive lamplighter. He is greeted by Sayal, who is perception personified and therefore notices the minute difference between 2 identical shadows and calls it friendly. Who, the tongue of command, offers a greeting so soft it turns into etiquette on the breeze. Hekka brings the toolkit labeled Magic Ordinary, which is all the magic needed for routine navigation. The serpent Mehen curls around the deck and the way a railing dreams of being held. No monsters, no heroics. This is not an action story. This is the shift where the world hums to itself and the crew nods along. Supplies are counted with affectionate pedantry. A jar of stars for emergencies sits beside a jar of very small winds for awkward corners. The oars are stacked like dependable sentences, every blade the shape of an agreement. A basket of pale onions rides along raw, as crew believes their layers keep the night from unraveling too fast, and also someone plans a soup later. There is, as always, a bundle of spare horizon in case the current one gets wrinkled. Xiao checks the list twice because checking is not suspicion, it is respect. Mehian adjusts his coil to keep the passengers from falling asleep and spilling dreams overboard. The boat pushes off at the exact moment a bat writes an elegant sigh on the air. The first stretch of the route is simple, a smooth canal of dark where the oars barely need to discuss it. Stars rise, which in Egypt counts as both astronomy and good manners. Ra leans on the tiller with a posture learned from palm trees. The crew begins their small talk, which is never small to them. They compare the Christmas of tonight's constellations to the Christmas of yesterday's bread. Someone mentions that the northern breeze has been using a new perfume, possibly tamarisk. Heka adjusts a faint glow around the prow so that the water can see them coming and feels included. In the logbook, Sial writes a line that looks like a sentence and reads like a lullaby. Entered familiar channel. Passengers, thoughts, birds, kindnesses delayed, 2 yawns. It is common knowledge that Ra meets certain hazards by night, but on this voyage the hazards have submitted the correct forms and taken a personal day. The Serpent of Chaos sends a note explaining he tried to hiss, but accidentally purred, and is now embarrassed. He will meet us tomorrow with renewed professionalism. The crew is sympathetic. Everyone in the universe has had a day like that. Without drama in the route, the boat devotes itself to detail. The planks creak in the same places they creaked last night, and someone thanks them for consistency. Who practices pronouncing fog in 3 different dialects, in case a cloud wants an introduction. My hand counts the reeds on a bank and loses count on purpose because counting forever can be too much like being awake. Halfway to midnight arrives on foot and sits on the gunwale. This is when the kitchen opens. A little brazier is lit with a coal saved from late afternoon. Its warmth is different in the dark, as if heat drops its manners and lounges. The onions donate a layer to the pot, then another, each layer making a sound like a whispered yes. Barley is added, dill, the secret pinch of natron, no one admits it, to restrain the soup from becoming enthusiastic. Ra tastes with a wooden spoon and nods the way an old friend nods at a familiar joke. When the spoon returns to the pot, it is promoted to aura flavor in the logbook. The boat carries other provisions for the world's sleep bundles of breaths dropped near windows. A tidy roll of soft thoughts to tuck beneath stubborn pillows. A jar of forgetfulness for half-remembered worries that keep reapplying for permission to speak. None of this is urgent. The boat has all night, which is precisely the right amount of time to do things gently. Sael sometimes pauses to watch one particular star, not because it is brighter, but because it has perfected the art of being present without insisting. He makes a note for the training manual. Star number 155, exemplary quiet. Man dozes with his eyes half open. The middle position preferred by guardians who trust the route and also their spine. Who remarks that the river smells like letters that have been read and kept. Rave smiles in his soft way. He remembers the sunlit faces who awake in a handful of hours and say, "Ah, the first word of every day," which is spelled exactly the way the horizon opens. The night has its own suburbs, little coves of silence, pools where worries float like cork and find their way to shore. The boat visits them on schedule. At one place, the crew trims the wick of a moon for a village that's been practicing early bedtimes. At another, they redistribute a few extra dreams to households with new babies. The babies will spend these dreams on generic adventures, such as seeing a cat 4 times at once and considering a spoon. Sometimes, the boat stops just to listen to frogs rehearsing. The frogs speak in temple registers and finish each phrase with a satisfied vowel. Heka records 1 bar and later notates it as music for teaching planks to float. In the second stretch, the water deepens so slowly that depth forgets the drama of the idea. Ra rests, that is, he stands at a wider ease. The crew cleans their tools not because they are dirty, but because cloth used in circles brings on a beneficial drowsiness. Sial dissolves a particularly stubborn knot of thought by soaking it in river names. Who recites the declaratives of comfort? Let there be warmth. Let there be the shoulder of a wall. Let there be the checkout line where you realize you forgot to worry. Haka yawns into a small jar, seals the lid, and labels it. Portable yawn for borrowing. Mehin turns the coil 1 ring inward, and the boat's balance sighs with gratitude. There is an aisle of constellations here that people rarely notice on purpose. A tiny cluster shaped like a loaf of bread rising very quietly. Another like a fish that knows a joke but is saving it for dawn. A string of points sometimes called the ladder of unimportant tasks, useful for climbing out of a day when you tried very hard and cannot name why. Ra encourages everyone to take a few stars home in their eyes for later. Eyes are trustworthy pockets. Xiao writes another line, passengers sleeping peacefully. Two exceptions, a merchant negotiating with himself about prices, and a small dream running in circles. Happy and lost, Mehan gently nudges the joyful dream toward an unoccupied pillow over the stern. The pillow welcomes the guest and writes a cordial postcard to gratitude. The center of night may be the quietest market in the world. Everything is available and nothing is for sale. Memories spread out like linens for airing. Regrets wander and looking for smaller shapes and often succeed. The boat glides along the market's edge and leaves a trail of pale light that politely does not wake anyone. At a stall made of mist, a woman is chalking the list of tomorrow's soups. Our crew approves the barley-onion combination with professional pleasure. At another stall, a boy sorts pebbles by whether they feel like pets. Heka purchases a stone that looks like a question mark with a dot missing. He decides to keep it that way. Hu and Xiao compare notes on the difference between silence and patience. Silence is a room. Patience is how you furnish it. Mehin adds that warmth is the basket you put under the table. Ra declares that the night's philosophy quota has been met and awards everyone a break. They each take 3 slow breaths and share them back to the river. This habit, they claim, keeps the Nile level. It could be nonsense. It is exactly the kind of nonsense that sustains boats and families. There is a staircase in the dark that leads to the place just before morning, and the boat reaches it right on time. The steps are not really steps. They are repeated kindness disguised as distance. As the prow rises a finger's width at a time, the crew prepares the world's small lights. Who tests the word dawn in a whisper to make sure it doesn't squeak. Xiao folds a map of streets and lays it under the oars so everyone will remember the shapes without thinking. Heka runs a cloth along the sunbeam that isn't here yet, which turns out to be a way to make it want to be here. Maiden uncoils a little, giving the deck more room to shine when shine becomes a verb again. On some nights, a guest rides with them, a farmer's hope, a child's question, a potter's half-shaped bowl asking to be finished by color. Tonight they carry something extremely ordinary, a list of chores, sweep yard, think water jar, turn onions so they grow memory in both directions, feed cat, forgive self for yesterday's clumsiness, practice being content with how a cup looks when it's only half washed. The list hums in the bilge like a bass string and gives the river a clean shadow to follow. Ra enjoys cargo like this. Grand destinies are fine, but nothing steadies the tiller like a well-bred sweep. The third stretch is where the crew switches to housekeeping for light. They polish the fronts of things, wheat faces, door thresholds. The spot on a cheek that sunlight likes as a surprise treat. Who rehearses the morning birds in his mouth, trying on each species for pitch. He does an excellent heron and a passable sparrow. Xiao arranges the day as reflections on water so that fishermen will see something kind before they see the net. Heka checks the jar of portable yan and releases a small sample into the breeze over a city where parents have stayed up too late, waiting for worry to tire. It works as designed. Several rooms yawn in harmony, decide against one more conversation, and purchase silence with gratitude. Mayhem tells a story about a previous century when the crew tried serving tea to the horizon. They set cups on the farthest line they could reach. The cups became circles of light that birds flew through a morning. The birds were delighted, but the cups were never seen again. Teaching story. Hospitality sometimes becomes scenery. Ra nods. He has seen entire dynasties glow for a moment and then become adjectives. The crew keeps working, faithful to verbs. Here the boat skims past hamlets, still folded. A few bakers begin the long appointment with dough. There is a family where the old father wakes first and the knight puts its hand on his back, guiding him like good posture. There is a woman who will look at the sky and accept, utterly without ceremony, the democracy of blue. There is someone who will forget their annoyance about a cup left in the courtyard and will remember instead the first joke a child ever told. Our crew does no miracles. They merely remind the air to carry these decisions quickly, like notes passed during a pleasant lesson. Toward the last bend, the sleeping world grows light under its eyelids. The boat's timbers, which have been murmuring all night, take on the kindness of bread returning to heat. Sayo closes the logbook for a moment, then opens it and adds, "This line reserved for compliments we forgot to give." Who clears his throat and announces, as tradition requires, that the horizon will open soon, and anyone who needs to be ready should be ready to feel ready. Heka unties a ribbon on which is written the morning. He does not unroll it yet, but the ribbon remembers how. Mayhem shakes a drop of river off his tail and declares it an offering to everyone who will wash their face with never heroic water. Dawn, as ever, is punctual without being rigid. The last stretch across the eastern reeds is quiet as a secret handshake. Ra breathes once the way a kill breathes when the first pot of the day decides to survive. He looks not at the sky, which is about to become an autobiography, but at the boat, which has again kept its promise. Carry the traveler, carry the crew. Carry the small freight of breath, and arrive without startling the egrets. It is a modest boast to make every morning, and the boat makes it well. There is a sweet custom here. Before the night shift ends, each crew member ties a tiny knot in the coil of time and hides it under the gunwale. The knots keep track of the good, repeating pieces like the way rooftops greet the sun with the same patience, or the way dust dances a little appointment in the first beam through a doorway. If any day becomes hectic, the knots persuade it to remember its own rhythm. They are not binding. They are reminders with good posture. Xiao ties his knot and thinks of a child's yawn that will travel from bed to kitchen like a blessing. Who ties his and thinks of a baker counting loaves as if counting were prayer. Heka ties his and thinks of a bruise that will fade without needing an explanation. Mayhem ties one with a tail tip so deft you would swear he learned knotwork from baskets. By now, the eastern bank has turned the color of old pomegranates, then new ones, then the inside of a warm hand. The boat glides into reeds so soft they seem to be washing it. Someone on shore plays a scale on a flute, testing whether the morning is in tune. It is. Ra steps forward, and the light that has been politely keeping its distance rushes up to meet him as a dog greets its person after absolutely minutes of separation. He smiles the way oars smile when they hear water. There will be heat and glare later, and decisions, and the traffic of days. But in this quiet, the sun practices being a household object, a lamp that happens to be enormous. The crew does not disembark here. They simply become less separate from what is about to happen. Xiao blends into the noticing that every face will do. Who becomes the exact words needed to ask for bread, to apologize, to compliment a good cat. Heka spreads very thinly over everything and calls it luck so ordinary it hides in plain sight. Maine finds a comfortable loop around the morning and decides to nap where shadows will be most grateful. The boat itself becomes less boat and more path. Ra, having stood all night in the posture of patience, takes half a step and becomes noon waiting to be used. You can borrow this passage if you like. Imagine you are a passenger most nights. Imagine the crew writes your name in their log in the neat script River Water prefers. While you sleep, they deliver the things you forgot to request, an extra breath for the steep steer, a pocket yawn that will arrive exactly when you need to stop speaking directions back to the easy chair of your own attention. And when morning opens, let your first thought be an oar, a simple tool that touches water and knows which way is forward, because forward is just the river agreeing. The logbook closes with a soft clap. The soup cools quietly for the noon meal. The jars of emergency stars remain sealed. The knots hold. The horizon lifts by habit and by love. And the boat, already preparing for tonight's shift, rocks once in ascent, as if to say that the gentle commute between rest and waking continues, always on time, always with room for one more sleeper to come aboard and be carried the slow, safe way.